Okay, for those of you just joining, welcome to our webinar. We are going to give everyone about a minute to filter in, and then we'll kick off. So thank you for joining. Okay, I'm going to start with some quick housekeeping. So we'll run this event for about an hour. And as you go, participants, please feel free to leave questions. There should be a box for questions down below. As the MC, I'll try and thread your questions in as they become relevant to the discussion. And then any questions we're not able to cover in the main webinar, we can cover at the end. So you should see, a little button for questions at the bottom. Cool. With that, I'll go ahead and get us started. So really excited to talk to you all today about the Remedy trial. It's an awesome example of a trial in a very important but underserved indication where aspects of the indication and the patient population have hindered research, but we're using creative study design and digital endpoints to help us overcome those challenges. So although the Remedy study itself is an MECFS, a lot of the lessons here are applicable to to any indication or therapy area with similar challenges. And most importantly, really excited to have here the two real leads and sort of brains behind the Remedy trial with us to discuss. So Dr. Simon Bock and Dr. Beata Godluska, who is PI of the Remedy trial. I'll hand over to them to do a brief introduction in just a second. But first, I will just give a brief introduction on myself. So I'm Mary, co-founder and co-CEO of Lindus Health. We are an accountable research organization running faster, more efficient studies, and we were very happy to collaborate with the team on the Remedy trial. So with that, Simon, I'll hand over to you to do an introduction.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you not only about innovative trial designs, but also about MECFS, which is really close to my heart. So I'm Simon. I'm a I'm a pharmacist by education with a PhD in pharmaceutics, and I'm with the Tiefenbacher Group for 4 years now, in both the market access and portfolio department and the clinical studies department. And I kicked the whole Remedy project off. So I introduced it to the company, and I talked to Lindus right in the beginning when we tried to design the study, and I'm also involved in the market access topics.
Fantastic, thank you. And Beata.
Hi, I am Beata Godlewska. I work at the University of Oxford, Department of Psychiatry, and I will in a second explain how psychiatry can be linked to MECFS. But I am a senior clinical researcher and a consultant psychiatrist.
Some background noise. I think we're in the clear.
Yes.
So, there you go.
Okay, I will continue. So my work focuses on understanding the mechanism of brain disorders, and that includes MECFS. So while I am a psychiatrist, I am mainly a neuroscientist, and we are trying to understand what leads to the development of symptoms, how through understanding the mechanism we can understand how to develop new treatments. And I can just resonate what Simon said, that MECFS is very close to my heart. It's been perceived for a long time as a condition that would receive not enough funding, not enough interest, but it's a very important condition. And I am very privileged to work with Tiefenbacher and Lindus on this amazing trial. I think people with MECFS very much deserve development of medication, because there are none of them. So that's a very brief statement from me.
Nice, thanks so much. Cool. So just a brief word on what we'll cover today. We'll hopefully leave you with 4 takeaways around practical design principles for remote and hybrid trials, a framework for selecting and integrating digital endpoints into studies, more of a detailed look at the remedy phase 2. So we'll be talking about recruitment, retention, data completeness. And then we'll talk about how all this applies to other programs, including other drug repurposing scenarios. So yeah. Firstly, we always do this to kick off a small poll. So basically, I'll go ahead and launch the poll now, and if our audience could just leave a response, that'll help us frame the rest of the discussion. Cool. I don't know if we have the results yet. Oh, there we go. So yeah, looks like we have about 15% of the audience who are very familiar, and then even split between somewhat familiar and not familiar. So yeah, that sounds about right based on the level of research we see in the condition. Cool. I am going to move on. So yeah, just to set the scene, we wanted to talk about ME/CFS as a condition, and for this, I'll hand over to Simon, who's obviously sponsor of this research. Yeah, Simon, do you want to walk us through ME/CFS, the therapy area in the background here?
Yes, sure. So it does not surprise me at all, the results of the poll, that the majority is either somewhat familiar or even not familiar with this disease. And even though I'm a pharmacist by training, as I just mentioned, I haven't heard a lot about ME/CFS. And ME/CFS stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis and chronic fatigue syndrome, but it's not simply fatigue. It's a very debilitating disease that can prevent people from one day to another from doing very ordinary things that define life. So it's chronic, it's serious, it's complex, and foremost, it's very heterogeneous, but characterized by a profound exhaustion that, what I just said, renders everyday activities almost impossible, or impossible sometimes even. And importantly, it's not alleviated by rest. One of the core symptoms is this post-exertional malaise, or PEM or PM, which is delayed or prolonged worsening of symptoms after truly minimal effort. But also we see cognitive dysfunction being reported by the patients. And I have to say, I'm not a patient myself, so I cannot really explain out of experience what this means. But when we talk to patients and physicians, it became really obvious that ME/CFS patients are suffering a lot, and but also a majority of ME/CFS patients will also suffer from this brain fog and cognitive impairment or fatigue, but also have pain, continuous pain, unrefreshing sleep, and orthostatic intolerance. So long story short, it poses a really significant personal but also socioeconomic burden. And it is associated with markedly reduced quality of life, obviously. What also surprised me very much when I heard about ME/CFS was that the quality of life reported by the patients is often lower than reported for many other chronic illnesses, cancer, or even multiple sclerosis. And it was also mentioned on the slide we are just displaying that it affects around 1% of the population. So it's way more than I thought, and far away from orphan status, I would say, obviously. So I hope to the audience who is not familiar with this disease that it becomes now very obvious that the disease is not only significant at an individual level, but I think personally that it has also, it's a burden on our societies, as the patients are invisible due to the nature of their disease, this profound exhaustion, sometimes even 24/7. So the pathophysiology of ME/CFS is not fully elucidated, and what I can But I do know from literatures that the onset often follows an acute infectious illness. It can be both in pediatric, but also in adults. And unfortunately, the diagnosis remains clinical. We have no definitive biomarker, as Mary also outlined in the beginning, or a diagnostic test. But I think Beate can describe best the diagnostic pathway from a healthcare professional point of view. But before I hand over, I would also like to flag again that there is no authorized pharmaceutical, neither in EU nor in US nor anywhere else in the world, that targets this underlying disease progress. And yeah, the current management is confined to symptomatic measures only today, to best of my knowledge.
Nice. Thanks, Simon.
Yes, thank you, Simon.
Perfect. Yeah, Beat, I was just going to give you to talk about some of the barriers in clinical studies in this condition.
I think there's quite a few barriers, to be honest. Like, it's not people with ME/CFS for sure. They really want to engage, and they're really fantastic participants, and like people are very keen to take part in our studies. But the nature of this disorder quite often makes it very difficult for people to take part. So one thing that Simon mentioned is the very fluctuating and often very severe picture of the symptoms. And there is this one symptom called PEM that, again, Simon talked about, that sometimes makes it impossible for people to actually engage in anything. So you can imagine in sort of more severe forms of this disorder, people can't do much. They can, for example, read a page of the book, and then they will crash, and they will have all the symptoms they normally suffer from exacerbate, and they won't have any energy to do anything. And as Simon said, people don't get the same relief from rest. So sometimes after reading this page of the book, people will be waiting another day or two to get better. Then you can imagine easily that coming for a traditional study visit, it may be quite impossible, like I wouldn't say exhausting, but it's actually virtually impossible, because this means that people wouldn't be able to do anything else for a long time. So this is one of the barriers to participation, which I think our design, remote design, really fantastically addresses. Another thing that I think is important is this is a very heterogeneous disorder. So it's very difficult to actually sometimes to diagnose a person. And Simon mentioned about the diagnostic journey. So one thing is that there is a different set of symptoms in different people that fluctuate. So again, we'll talk about it a bit later, about the measures that we use in the study to address this point. But also, unfortunately, there is a lot of stigma associated to ME/CFS. And I think this is also a huge barrier to participation, because people can't get the diagnosis. Sometimes they don't know that they've got ME/CFS, and then they wouldn't be able to take part in the studies. And the third problem is budgets. We need bigger budgets to run traditional studies. If people need to come from far away, we would need taxis, we need to support them in some way, but there's of course limits to what people can put into coming. I think that those are like three basic barriers, and we will address them in this webinar.
Nice, thank you. So yeah, I mean, maybe Simon, turning back to you, would be curious for your and Tiefenbacher's perspective on what made this such an interesting indication to pursue.
Yes, sure. So if I may, I'd just like to briefly introduce Tiefenbacher to the audience. So Tiefenbacher is a family-owned company founded in 1963, and we're an international healthcare company offering services across the entire value chain. Pharmaceutical value chain, so from drug sourcing and distribution to development, but also manufacturing and global registration of generics, of value-added medicines, and also innovative medicines. So we bring pharmaceutics from concept all the way to the market. We have our own laboratories and manufacturing sites in India and in Cyprus, where we are headquartered in Hamburg, Germany. And we have our B2B partners across the globe in more than 80 countries, and with more than 900 employees across the globe. We truly work together to improve patients' lives by making pharmaceuticals more affordable, more accessible, and simply better. And I think this meeting at the trial is not only about ME/CFS, but about drug repurposing, which offers an attractive value proposition, of course, especially in the indications like ME/CFS. But for us at Tiefenbacher, we have this drug repurposing initiative, and we are open to other drug repurposing ideas. But obviously, I think on the opportunity side, with drug repurposing, you do not start from scratch, right? So you typically know at least something about the molecule safety profile or the pharmacology or the manufacturing, and that can certainly accelerate development and lower some early risks. And combined with an appropriate trial design and a patient-centric trial design, repurposing can, I believe, generate really robust evidence in real-world relevant populations faster and hopefully sometimes more effectively than de novo developments. At the same time, I would like to flag that repurposing is far from trivial, as also displayed on the slide we're just sharing, right? So we have to create a sustainable IP and data exclusivity position, and you need to choose and navigate the right regulatory pathway, and you need to differentiate a repurposed product from off-label use. It's, I think, very important, and you need to build a value story that convinces not only patients to trust in the safety and efficacy of the drug, but also healthcare professionals to prescribe and ultimately pay us to reimburse at an acceptable price. But I think from a scientific point of view, the biggest challenge includes the risk of over-interpreting weak or noisy clinical signals, and which we had for sure in the very beginning of the Remedy project. So when we kicked this project off and we reviewed the use cases that were available, it was a lot of noise, and we wanted to investigate whether this is not only noise but really clinically relevant. So the need to design a trial that can detect clinical meaningful effects in this heterogeneous patient groups, this was, I believe, one of the biggest challenge, and it is truly also one of the biggest challenge in other drug repurposing projects.
Nice. And good segue now into talking about the Remedy trial. So this was, or this is still, the phase 2 trial we've run together in ME/CFS. I think, Simon, you, from the start, you had this really interesting concept of a fully virtual trial design and leveraging remote endpoints to the maximum extent possible to kind of get around these key challenges in ME/CFS. And so, obviously, we're going to spend a bit of time talking about how this works in practice. I guess as a sponsor, Simon, what convinced you that this slightly unorthodox approach for a phase 2 study was the right one? So this, remote approach and making maximal use of remote endpoints.
Yeah, sure. So what I think Beata also touched upon, right? So the decision to go fully virtual or decentralized really came from the disease and the patients. So if you listen to people with ME/CFS, if you listen to the patient advocacy groups and the physicians who are managing and treating ME/CFS patients, traveling to a trial site and spending hours under bright lights in the clinic and then repeating that every few weeks, I think this is simply not realistic for many of them. So we, as Tiefenbacher, we started from the question, if we want a trial that a representative ME/CFS population can actually participate in, what would it have to look like? And I think this naturally led us to this decentralized, mostly home-based setup with digital recruitment, with tele visits and monitoring, but also with the wearables the level I'm wearing myself. So in that sense, Virtual was not a cool technology choice. It was truly a patient-centric necessity, I would say.
Nice. And yeah, Beata, obviously there are, I guess, nuances to running a fully virtual study, effectively ensuring patient safety and oversight. As the PI of the study, what convinced you that a fully virtual design, could still be run effectively and ensure that, patient safety was taken care of?
There I say two main aspects to it. So one, the study was incredibly well designed. So from this, let's say, administrative point of view, it was really well done. The protocol was very detailed. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. Everybody knew what every step would look like. And that ensured that people, that there would be consistency, basically, and we would get very good data quality, even if the data was not collected during a physical study visit. And the second part of it was how humans at both ends work together. So what I mean by both ends, so it was the team of people who were really committed to the study, who really wanted it to run really well. And it wasn't just because they really wanted it. It was also designed the way that there was the central oversight, there were regular meetings of the team, everything was discussed, there were no things that couldn't be discussed, and people always felt supported, and they were always there for the participants. So there was a team that could be contacted during the night if participants didn't feel well at the point. And that was also our feedback from the patients, that they felt well supported, that they felt safe, and that they always had very professional and very caring response from the team. I think that is really essential, this mutual trust to run this kind of the study successfully.
Awesome, thank you. And so yeah, we've obviously talked about remote endpoints. This study leveraged them heavily, and going to go into a bit more detail about how we use remote endpoints to kind of fill I guess the data gap that we have in ME/CFS with some of the traditional gold standard endpoints. So I can just briefly narrate this, but the study made use of the Oura ring for continuous sleep activity, HRV monitoring, all in a real world environment in a very unobtrusive way. I think we used Grippable for remote hand grip testing, again, that participants could do or patients could do from home. And then we sort of layered continuous monitoring on top to sort of validate how this was working and ensure that any issues were picked up in real time, because obviously there aren't any site visits in a study like this. These effectively form a composite endpoint where there isn't strong consensus on what the right validated biomarker is. And so what I think was really cool from my perspective about these remote endpoints is that unlike some of the more traditional endpoints in the space, PEM scores, NASA lean test, et cetera, the remote endpoints are longitudinal. So we've got very rich longitudinal data at all points of time throughout a participant study visit. I think particularly interesting given a condition like ME/CFS, where the participant experience of it is highly heterogeneous, and so yeah, it gives you a much richer picture. But yeah, Beata, how did this digital data complement your traditional clinical assessments, and how do you weigh up the evidence from each?
So you touched upon it already, Mary. Especially in a condition like ME/CFS, where symptoms are fluctuating, it's not that people get better over time and this week they will feel like this and the next week they will feel like this. How they feel, it may change from an hour to an hour, day to a day. It's really essential to capture those intermittent data, which is impossible in a classical clinical trial design when somebody comes for a visit every 1 or 2 weeks or maybe every month. This is not the case of ME/CFS. We want to see what changes in a very short span of time. And this is what we can get from those telemeasures, let's call them. We brainstormed a lot, thinking about which tools to use, and Oura Ring felt very easy to wear. It gave us a lot of data, good quality data, and patients found it really simple. Grippable was supported by the team, so that's another aspect of virtual assessment, so people can sit actually on the screen. Patients are not left alone, but a nurse or support person from the team can actually guide them through everything. So I think in the context of this kind of disorder, it's actually quite crucial to get this type of data. And if I may mention, we also had to pre-screen people, because we had to be sure that people who enter the study, they are safe. So we had to take bloods for this. And that also could be done remotely. So I mean, a team, a nurse would actually travel to participants. And that could be a big barrier for people to come for the screening assessment, just to assess if they can actually enter the study.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's a really interesting point, because something we see pretty consistently is in studies with, high screen failure rates and highly heterogeneous populations, and that goes for this study and also some of our work in psychiatry, any efficiency gains or anything you can do to like improve the efficiency of the screening process and reduce the number of steps has an outsized impact on cost. Because if your screen failure rate is 80%, you're going to be screening 4 times is that math, right? 4 times, 5 times as many patients for every patient you enroll, versus something, with a lower screen failure rate. So yeah, can be often overlooked in the operational planning of a study, but yeah, really important. And we have a question here from Arthur, who asks, sorry, I'm just pulling open the questions again. How was compliance monitored remotely? So I don't know if either of you can speak to this, about how compliance with some of the exploratory and indeed primary and secondary endpoints was monitored. I think, Beata, you're on mute.
Sorry. We had a team checking data every day, and people were supposed to the questionnaires to report adverse effects or potential adverse effects, which could be just symptoms in case of this population. But we had this continuous flow of information that we were looking at in a very consistent manner. So we could see that people stayed engaged with us. We could be in touch whenever it was necessary with people over the phone. We had very quick responses. If a patient would bring up anything, really, any question, they would be called by a relevant member of the team, including a medic, if it was needed. And we didn't really lose people. We may talk about it later, but people actually stayed on medication. At the end, we would ask them to actually return the tablets if they didn't use them. So we would keep an eye on how the drugs were used. And I think this was quite important for the safety. But I think this constant monitoring was really crucial in terms of compliance.
Nice. Yeah, and Arthur just followed up to clarify that he was referring to taking the medicinal product. So yeah, I think you answered that. But yeah, obviously both compliance with the protocol and compliance with the dosing regimen, really important in a study like this. Cool.
If I may add, in terms of, so even if study is not fully remote, we can help participants, for example, by sending text messages to remind them about taking medications. But even if it's a traditional setup with people visiting the site, we still have to rely very much on people actually wanting to take the medication. And this is no different for the remote trial.
Yep, really good point. Okay, cool. Yeah, we touched on this already. So yeah, I mentioned the Oura Ring and grippable grip strength feeder. Next, I wanted to turn to patient enrollment. And so as we mentioned, this was a fully remote study. So we were enrolling patients from across a variety of geographies. We used a kind of a dedicated social media campaign to identify the right patients, as well as partnerships with patient groups and health record screening. And I'll just briefly say a word, and then Simon, I was going to get you to comment on this as well. I think this is really interesting from my perspective, because again, in this kind of condition, you want to be able to enroll selectively, the most moderately or the most severely ill patients, right? Because those are the most likely to respond to treatment. And so, removing those barriers, reducing site visits enables you to do that. Yeah, Simon, I mean, when you kind of proposed this enrollment approach, firstly, was that top of mind? And secondly, what did this recruitment approach look like from your side? While the recruitment campaign was ongoing, did you have any concerns about the types of patients enrolled, and sort of what gave you the confidence that that the study was enrolling the right patients?
I think it's a very, very good point. So, of course, we as the sponsor had some operational concerns. I think this is okay to have concerns right in the beginning, right? First, I mean, concerns in terms of are we as a pharmaceutical company ready for such a state-of-the-art trial? I mean, operationally, in terms of headcount, skill set, and experience. But when it comes to enrollment and the right strategy to enroll the right patients, we also heavily relied on the feedback we received from patient advocacy groups and patients. So we tried to, on the one hand, recruit a number of ME/CFS patients that are representative for the heterogeneity of ME/CFS, but on the other hand, also to see in which kind of patient group the IMP might work, or might be safe, or might be effective. But on the other hand, of course, we need to ensure that the people you enroll are homogeneous, right? That you don't have too much variations in the symptoms variety. So when we started this trial, we focused on a very small territory first, right? I mean, Mary could also elaborate on that for hours on how we then picked one territory after another, but we were really clear in what kind of patients do we want to enroll. And again, the patient advocacy groups highly recommended to us to go the route by enroll patient or recruit patients due to with social media reach and digital pre-screening that allows also the patients to do everything online and asynchronously and at their convenience.
Nice, thank you. I'm going to try and thread a couple more questions in. So we have a question on how quality control and quality assurance was ensured within AI native operating systems. So I think that refers to our Citrus platform, which we covered a couple slides ago. So Citrus is Lindus Health's kind of trial operating system. So it encompasses EDC, eSource, ePro, aspects of a CTMS. And when we say AI native, what this means is, the AI is not in control of the system, but rather the AI assists our experts in clinical operations, data management, and quality to ensure, QA, that regulations are being followed. So, for instance, AI might help one of our data managers author a data management plan, and in fact, they did for this study. The AI does not just write a data management plan and then no one checks it. Rather, the AI will help our data manager adhere to a template and then QC their work. So we're not using AI to replace anyone. It's more about augmenting what experts can do already to help them have a bigger impact. And then obviously, the whole system conforms to the standards you can see on the bottom of the slide as well. Cool. So just jumping back here. Cool. So yeah, I think that covers us on patient recruitment. So I'm going to launch one more poll, and then we're going to talk about some of the operational results of the study and operational proof points in a second.
Can I just say there is a question in the chat from Sandra?
Yeah. Oh, I might have missed it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, Sandra asks if we were able to differentiate between different degrees of symptom severity when enrolling patients, and then whether we saw any difference between males and females and different ages. I'm not sure, Beata, are you able to comment on that?
Yes, so it's a very important issue. Ideally, we would have people of different severities of illness, and of course, we would have the equal numbers of males, females, and would like to look at different aspects of the disorder. However, at the beginning of research, we also want the group to be relatively homogeneous, which means that we can't have people who are super mild or really, really severe. We have to go for this sort of golden middle, which doesn't mean that we wouldn't expand further. So it's about something that is called in statistics power, how much we can rely on the results that we can see. And one issue with ME/CFS, we don't know fully what the mechanisms are, as Simon mentioned, which means we don't know if people, for example, with more severe forms of disorder, they will have additional mechanisms coming in that make them feel so unwell. So for now, we focus on people who are relatively moderate. I don't think we're contacted by people who are very severe, to be fair. We try to be consistent. So you also asked about how sure we were. I think that was the core of the question. How sure we're that we're getting right people in the trial. So we screened them. That was remote. They had a call with a medic, and we also, with permission of the patients, we got insight into medical records. So we were quite selective for this particular trial. But there may be plans for expanding, and then we'll definitely want to have bigger groups and people of all severities or genders. We had more females, but this was again because women contacted us more often. Okay.
Thanks, Beata. Yeah, so just moving on to operational proof points of the study. So I'm going to briefly narrate this, but you can see the study enrolled at a significantly higher rate than comparable studies, so about 3.7 patients per site per month. We had a total of 22 primary and secondary endpoints in the study, so much richer data, particularly important in this phase 2, than comparable studies, so comparable phase 2 studies in ME/CFS. Simon, I'm curious for your view, from the sponsor side, what kind of what was this valuable to you for helping guide the future of the program? Was there anything that, if we could redo the study about the design, that you would change perhaps?
I mean, we do not have the final results of the study yet, so I think we need to draw the conclusions once the results are final and available. However, for us at Tiefenbacher, it was not only important to assess the efficacy and safety of our IMP, but also contribute to research in ME/CFS by exploring exploratory digital endpoints as an example, also to educate or inform the community about not only feasibility of remote decentralized trials, but also about the data, right? So traditional patient-reported outcomes are still the gold standard to capture the subjective symptoms, the symptom experience in ME/CFS, I would say. So fatigue and the spam exacerbation or cognitive issues and so on. And I assume they are what clinicians and also regulators are used to seeing. At the same time, relying only on a few questionnaires, we felt that this would risk missing a lot of nuances and day-to-day variability. So that is where we believe wearables and exploratory endpoints and digital measures come in because, as you already said, Mary, right, they give us the continuous and more objective context around activity, sleep, heart rate variability, and circadian patterns. But of course, we were really picky when it comes to the selection of the primary and secondary endpoints to really understand what ME/CFS is about and how the IMP may affect the symptoms.
Nice, thank you. And yeah, maybe a useful time to thread in Sarah's question. So Sarah had a question on, did we see any remote measures emerge as especially sensitive or useful beyond what you expected? I'm not sure if we can comment yet based on the results being in analysis still, but yes, Simon or Beata, I'm not sure if you have a view on that.
So as you said, right, so the results are not available yet. Oh, sorry. So we cannot really answer this question even if we wish to do.
No. Well, we can probably say that the measures were acceptable. The tests were really doable for patients. They were not felt as a huge burden. And that's also a very important point when trying to get data from a given population.
Yeah. So what I can also add, I think, again, the core pro endpoints are supported by this halo of exploratory endpoints. The core primary endpoints and secondary endpoints, of course, drive the efficacy story, and the digital layer, I think, helps us to interpret the findings, but also may or may not help us to explore subgroups and yeah, hopefully and potentially generate a hypothesis for future work. However, I have to say that these are really exploratory, very early stage, so it needs to be validated. So digital measures in ME/CFS are still evolving, and there's a long way to go until being accepted by any regulatory party.
Yep. Maybe I can also thread in the question here from Shashida, who asks, yeah, what is the regulatory perspective on DCTs in general, and then maybe specifically within ME/CFS? I mean, I can answer in general terms. So I think the FDA, MHRA, and EMA all have either guidance or recommendation papers for using kind of decentralized elements in clinical trials. So generally sort of well provided for, and a number of other regulatory bodies as well. But of course, it's just a tool, right? I think this is a good example of where a decentralized design does unlock utility, as Simon and Beata, you have explained, for reaching the right patients, for lowering barriers to participation without compromising or indeed enhancing data quality. But like, it's definitely not a one size fits, or it's definitely not a silver bullet for any indication. To see the majority of indications, it would be not advisable to use a decentralized design. So yeah, that's my view. But I don't know if Simon or Beata, you can comment on whether there is specific guidance for ME/CFS that's published by any regulators or perhaps other bodies for decentralized trials within ME/CFS.
No, not really to best of our knowledge, but of course we're in contact with the regulatory bodies, and decentralized design of this trial was very well received and commented in a very positive way. So I think this is something that, of course, everyone who's interested in running ME/CFS trials should do, right? Engage with the regulators very early. And I am convinced that the Remedy trial will again indicate or substantiate that decentralized trial design is the most appropriate for ME/CFS patients.
And I think general guidance applies here. So we have to make sure that patients are safe. That's the main thing. And then indeed, this aspect of decreasing burden for participation and increasing participation, because people who otherwise would not be able to take part actually can take part. This is actually really well received by the regulators.
Yeah, and if I just can add, so as we said, right, so the feedback has been broadly positive, but we had to be very clear on the hierarchy. So what is confirmatory, what is exploratory, and again, how do we handle the fact that digital measures are still evolving and not validated at all in MECFS?
Cool, thanks. So yeah, final couple slides here. So some reflections on, what worked with the study design and operations, what didn't, and then what might be next for the program, as much as you can share. And maybe I'll put this to both of you, but perhaps if there are other sponsors in the audience in similar conditions, or indeed in MECFS, what would you advise them consider about this kind of trial design?
I think what works really well is this fantastic accessibility to a trial. And as we mentioned, MECFS is a disorder that doesn't have any approved pharmacological treatment. So it's really massive that there is a treatment that can be hopeful. Actually, it's being trialed, and many people wanted to take part in this study, and many people wouldn't have been able to if it wasn't for this decentralized design of the trial. There's a lot of points that apply to both on-site and decentralized trials. So as you see it on the slide, it's like there's this limited consensus on objective endpoints. And there's a lot of discussions about which questionnaires, which measures are most appropriate, but I think it doesn't depend on the trial as such. It depends on more like clinical understanding of the condition, and then getting more research data about the mechanisms and what MECFS really is, what leads to it. Then we will be able to be more sure about the outcome measures. I think outcome measures that we used were really thought through, and yeah, we rely on them. And one point that maybe Simon is better to address is budgets, really. I can see it from a research perspective, how little money goes towards MECFS, and I would like to see more of it. I am really grateful as a clinician that Tiefenbacher wanted to invest money in this condition, but like specifics of the budget, that's probably Simon's area.
Yes, I try to comment on that the best way I can. But I think MECFS has currently the best momentum it ever had. So speaking Germany now, I think there are some funds. There's more money available to start trials to explore the pathomechanism. But now, on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry or Tiefenbacher Group respectively, drug repurposing projects are by nature always high-risk projects. And with the generic competition you're facing right from day one, I have to just say innovative designs are exciting for sure. But at the end of the day, you still need to have a solid evidence package alongside a strong IP and regulatory and market access strategy. And I think this is the reason why many companies are curious, but cautious. So we, as the project team, we had to show that our trial design is aligned with what follows downstream. So we were able to get the buy-in for doing something really innovative. And I have to repeat myself, but we as a family-owned company, we have some more freedom to operate. So our family wants us to spend some time to allocate some resources into neglected diseases. But I would totally agree to Beata and every other member of the MECFS community that we would need way more money to really understand the underlying mechanisms of this disease. But we should be bold and do some innovative trial designs and trials to understand more. And I think this is what we did. We are not at the end of the story yet, so let's see the outcomes, what the trial will bring. And as this is a phase 2A, 2B trial, obviously we would need to conduct several other phase 3 trials before getting any sort of approval for this disease, for this treatment. But I really, again, like to be cautious, since this was a very small study and we need to confirm whether we have seen only random noise or a truly clinically relevant signal. So more to come, I would say, and then we can talk about it, the follow-up study program, hopefully in a few weeks, I hope.
Nice. Yeah, we're all eagerly awaiting the results to drop. Cool. So I think final couple of points, and we'll just try and answer any outstanding questions after that. But yeah, so I think my takeaways are as follows. So yeah, so I think the remedy study is really interesting in that it shows how you can achieve regulatory rigor without a physical site. So home dosing, endpoints captured remotely, able to enroll exactly the right participants for the study. I think Simon and Beata, you guys have given a good overview of how, I like the way you put it, Simon, sort of the halo of digital endpoints provide supporting data alongside the accepted primary endpoints in this therapy area. And then I think the third point is this kind of design just allows us to get much more creative with reaching the right patients, ensuring we can selectively enroll the right patients from kind of a country-sized area. And then finally, I mean, you guys touched on budget, so I can say a bit more. We found this design to be lower cost overall than a site-based design, so it has that added benefit because you're kind of removing one layer from the stack. Monitoring is much easier when the source and EDC are one and the same data, apart from the wearable data. So it makes the study operations much easier. But Beata, Simon, any final points that you'd like to impart on the audience before we just answer the remaining questions?
It's absolutely fantastic that we've got this kind of design at hand. And am I wrong to think that actually a lot of things started during the COVID pandemic, when we started thinking that we can do things differently and reach people in a different manner without losing quality of the contact. And I can see it in some clinical settings and also applies to clinical trials. I think it really increases participation, it increases opportunities, people don't feel excluded, which is absolutely really important, that everybody can participate, and the quality of the contact of the data, it's good. It's good. So why not use this design? And I witnessed myself how rigorous everybody was about doing the study properly. It was absolutely a fantastic experience.
Absolutely. I can only copy that. Maybe my grain of salt is going fully virtual was not the technology first decision for this trial. It was really a patient first decision. I think this is the most important key takeaway for me personally.
Really good point. And I mean, this brings us on to, Sandra has a couple of questions. So regulators were positive about decentralized design. That's a quote. Have you experienced this with European regulators or only with US ones? I mean, I can comment. So this study was run in Europe, in the UK. The UK probably has the best kind of facilitation for remote study designs in Europe, in my opinion. Most European countries are supportive of remote study designs. There are local nuances. For example, in Germany, there are additional rules around who can provide participant-informed consent. In France, there are some rules about the types of platform, or there are additional rules about the types of platform that can capture consent remotely. So, there are local nuances for sure, but generally, a decentralized study is viable in most European geographies. And Sandra, you also asked, did we use omics data at all? I know we didn't capture omics data as an endpoint in this study, but I don't know, Simon or Beata, did you guys look at omics data or consider using omics data perhaps as a screen, or for strategy?
No, not for the study. Screening, the diagnosis is not based on any physical biological data, so there wouldn't be much use for it. And the focus of this kind of trial is to see whether people respond to the medication in terms of symptoms, rather than trying to understand the exact mechanism which omics data would add to. And as we spoke about budgets, it would really increase the budget needed for this trial. While in the future, there's so much we could do.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yes, absolutely. So as a scientist, I would of course prefer to generate as much data as possible and allowed. And I think it would be great to have omics data being captured throughout the study. But as Pierre already said, right, this would overblow the budget for such kind of trial, such proof of concept trial. And I'm afraid if we would have included omics data, then we wouldn't have even conducted the study at all.
Cool. Okay, perfect. I think that brings us nicely on time, so we can go ahead and end there. But thank you all so much for tuning in, for your questions. Obviously, huge thank you to Simon and Beata for sharing your thoughts with us. And yeah, really excited to see the progress of the program, and looking forward to keeping you all up to date with that. So yeah, for me, thank you very much again, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.